All right. Let me just sync. Sweet. Welcome to the Monkey Dance Podcast. This is On, and I'm sitting here today with Reto Schneider, a Swiss journalist who has been taking some time to do some work in Vienna. So excited to sit down and have a chat with you, Reto. So if you could start us off by telling us who you are and what you do, it'd be great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm a journalist for NZZ, which is the major newspaper in Switzerland. I come from science journalism. I have a degree in electrical engineering, but I then switched rather quickly to science writing. And more I do all kinds of stories. I mainly work for the magazine, the monthly magazine of the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, where I do a lot of very long feature stories. And I also do have this column about strange experiments, which I do now for 25 years. Unusual, bizarre experiments which don't need to be important or new, but which need to be kind of special and bizarre.
Nice. And so you've done a wide range of journalism. What do the long form pieces typically center around?
Oh, they can center around anything, basically. I have the privilege to choose my own subject, so I did a long story on land ownership and how through the ages it happened that land can be owned at all, and how this came about. I did one of the first stories about AI and large language models, even before November 22, I think it was, when ChatGPT came, because I had an access before. What else? Recently I did a really interesting story about sentencing. So the part of when you are at court and you're guilty, and how it's defined, how your sentence is defined, which is a very accidental process, I found out.
Oh, I thought we'd focus a lot on the science, but there are definitely a few questions I want to ask about land ownership and sentencing later. So let's circle back to that. But so you've been here at the Complexity Science Hub in Vienna.
Yes, I'm a journalist in residence at the Complexity Hub. It's a 3 months stint I did there, which was great. I mean, just amazing. And I took the time off from my job in Zurich. So I came here, and that's how I got to know you, basically. Also, because one of those long stories I wrote some time ago was about opinions, where opinions come from, and that led to quite a lot of other stories, and finally to a book which I have here, by the way.
Nice.
So it's a book in German, Die Kunst des klugen Streitgesprächs, which is kind of the art of arguing intelligently.
Nice. I'll definitely put a link to it in the show notes as well. And what were you working on while you were here? Did you have a major project at the Science Hub?
I did, actually. I followed a researchers group by the name of Peter Turchin, and he actually has this idea that you could, from data, you could predict history in some rather rough way. And I was very fascinated always by the question, how do what is history for as a science? And also I was a little bit taken aback by a lot of historians when they tell you we can't say anything about the future, but then they can explain anything about the past. So this didn't seem to fit to me, because if you can't explain the past, you have a theory about what was happening and why it was happening, then it should be possible to do at least some rough prediction. But they all kind of shy away from that. And now Peter Turchin, he's basically collecting numbers of any nation, society in the last 5,000 years, and he's trying to find out which ones of those numbers are important in terms of why did we form those huge societies, which we have today, coming from hunter and gatherers, for example, and also and especially why do those societies always go through kind of waves of crisis, and then they bloom again, and then there is a crisis again. Where does this come from? So that's basically, and I followed him, and I'm going to write a long feature story about this research.
That's really interesting. So the facts and figures that societies have compiled over time, why they've gone through different phases as societies, that's kind of his...
He wants to find out, which ones of those
are predictors.
Numbers, which one of those numbers are important. Because there's some theories, there always were in history, what led to what. I mean, like I think there is the irrigation hypothesis, where you say, the irrigation led to those kind of organized large societies. And so he basically tests a lot of those hypotheses with the numbers, and then he tells you, yes, the numbers do match up or they don't. What he is basically saying is you should try to do history, at least part of it, like a natural science with numbers. You should mathematize it. That's the only way you really can test your hypothesis. Everything else is, there is a lot of hindsight bias. You know how it worked, and you just, it's a descriptive science. So it's much more difficult to really be very strict with your with the testing of your hypothesis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what a lot of data scientists tend to do is take a quantified set of variables, build a hypothesis, and then look at a new sample set for which data exists. Yeah,
yes.
And test.
They also do have this amazing database called Seshot, where they basically try to for every society that ever was, they try to find all the numbers they could. I mean, they need a lot of proxies because obviously, like Cleopatra didn't do any statistics, so you have to infer from other, like a lot of archaeological data. They kind of infer, how many workers you had, how many farmers, how many soldiers, and so on in a society.
Right. What were some of the interesting things you found while you were there?
So actually, when I was joining their meetings, I would say like 3/4 of the time they were just discussing where we could get additional data from, because obviously that's their problem. If other people they do like immigration research or cryptocurrency, they all get the numbers basically from administrations, from institutes, from people who collect those data today. But if you want to know, like in the Middle Ages, if how many people died in a war and so things like that, did the people have, what weapons did they have, how many of those? I mean, it's incredibly difficult. So a lot of it is basically collecting the data, and then afterwards they can work with it.
Wow. So you have this process of actually trying to get more ingenious with your data collection strategies, right? With just methodological concerns of where does the data come from? Is it accurate? Who else can we ask?
Exactly.
So they're probably working with a bunch of, sociologists, anthropologists, archaeologists. There's just a huge range of people then that you're accessing.
Exactly, yes. I mean, they right now they also try to do it with AI, and then because they know that the LLMs are trained basically with every book that is known, and then they give kind of the estimates of the LLMs they give to experts, and they have kind of different levels of confidence then of their data. It's really a tough work.
Yeah, that sounds painstaking. So was there anything that they found while you were there that seemed interesting?
No, actually, it's not that they just find something like that, like
Mm-hmm.
like in most research, I guess, if you go there for 3 months. But I mean, the one hypothesis they were testing with a lot of data recently, I mean, for a long time already, but it more seems clear that the data fit is this concept of elite overproduction. So the basic idea that if you produce more people who aspire for an elite position, then you have elite positions. You get into trouble because those people will not be happy that they were not chosen, that they don't get the position. So they will form a counter elite, which will look for unhappy people who will vote for them, and this is, according to them, this is one major mechanism how societies do get into
trouble. Wow. So that's more on the political schism side.
Exactly. So there is this nice saying, I don't know which historian said it. Most of those society are not murdered; they beget suicide.
Yeah, that's a good point. So are they also looking at, because I guess in the present moment you have a lot of political indicators that are really relevant to discover, say, that are indicators of failure or risk factors, but you have sort of planned economies, say in kingdoms or empires. Are those the things that they're also interested in?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh yes.
Okay. So it's just really a broad swath of.
Oh yes. Yes. The problem that comes with it is that, for example, for the elite overproduction, the definition of an elite changes with time. So today an elite is something completely different than when you go to back in the 1400s in France.
Right.
So that's so you have to have a clear definition of what an elite is, and then you have to look for how could we quantify this idea during this or that time, which can be that it's always a different way of doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because presumably things like hunger or drought, sort of the natural factors that end up impacting any civilization, would play a huge role. But then you have sort of these internal factors of just the individuals playing politics that end up driving a civilization apart.
I mean, this is another question. How much is how much role play individuals were versus the whole economical situation, and they're also looking at. They want to look at kind of the influence of individuals, but that's a whole other really difficult story. But basically, what they're saying is, yes, individuals play a role, but those kind of waves of crisis and then bloomings again, they're largely independent of individuals. I mean, one idea is that they become important how to get out of a crisis. So it's important who is there as an individual to get out of a crisis. But if those indicators they found, there are more than elite overproduction. If those indicators they found point downwards, there is almost no way of getting out of it, right? Because it's just it takes a very long time to correct.
Right. Yeah, and there's no way to isolate any of the factors, which I'm sure which is why they're doing it at Complexity Science Hub, right? It's
exactly,
the integration of all the things. I mean, nothing can generate a revolution faster than a famine. So that's definitely probably part of it. So can you tell me more about the work on opinions that you worked on? Because I feel like this also sort of plays very, very much into political dynamics.
Yes, it actually became somewhat a little bit my hobby horse, those opinions, because it started, the magazine I work for is subject-oriented. So we do every month, or now every 2 months, we do another subject. And I think it was 2020, we had the idea to do an issue on opinions. No, it was actually later. I think it was, when was COVID? It was
2020 was the first
2020,
wave.
okay,
Yeah.
yes, it was shortly after COVID hit. For obvious reasons, because we all know that opinions became a whole new, became a new definition during that time. So, and I remember we had this meeting and we were talking about, what kind of stories we would like to do. And then we thought, okay, maybe we need a kind of a definition. What is an opinion? And so we came up with an opinion is based on a kind of a rational assessment of facts. So most people would probably agree on that. But then suddenly we realized that there's a problem with this definition, because if that would be true, we should agree much more today than like 30 years ago, because now we have the internet. Basically, everybody has the same access to facts, if he or she wants to. But it doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, we're not agreeing more, and there was this was the first kind of riddle. We were thinking something with this definition doesn't work. And the second thing is we realized that this definition, an opinion is based on a rational assessment of facts, actually one should say, my opinion is based on a rational assessment of facts, because we realized that you think of your own opinion as being this rational consideration, not necessarily the opinion of the others. So that's it all, how it all started and led to all those articles and the book.
Yeah, because there's this general naive realist sort of account of what I believe seems to be correct. The biases I hold are not biases that deviate from what I think is factual. Everybody else has biases that deviate from fact.
Exactly. Right? Yes. I mean, it's funny because the interesting question to ask is actually not what do you think your opinion is, but what do you think of a person who disagrees in an important in an issue that is important to you, who disagrees with you? And that is really an interesting question. I do workshops from time to time about opinion formation, and I give talks. And if I ask people, what do you think? Think of an issue that is dear to your heart, and now somebody is disagreeing with you. So what do you think? And there are 4 typical answers here. The first one is the person is just too stupid to understand the issue. We don't say that to the face of somebody, but let's be honest, most of us already thought this guy is just too stupid to if they utter something we don't agree with. Second is lying. That's a lot in the in the political sphere. You assume that your opponent is lying. They actually know that they're wrong, but they have ulterior motives. So they're not telling the truth. And the third is indoctrination. Somebody grew up in a wrong country, in the wrong family, went to the wrong university, and if I would have gone there, maybe I would think like this person. So that's as far as people go. But I didn't, and it's still wrong. And then there's the fourth possibility, and that's the option we use maybe with friends when we have discussions. We assume that there is a lack of knowledge, and we will now infuse this knowledge, and then the person surely will agree that he or she was wrong. Now, it doesn't work. We all know that it doesn't work. But the interesting thing is there is a really obvious answer to this question why somebody is disagreeing with you. And to this day, nobody in the talks, in the workshops, came up with this answer. And it's the most obvious answer. Why doesn't somebody agree with you? Because the person is right. And that's really fascinating, because it doesn't make sense. You know, I mean, you should be eager to go with factual, well-grounded opinions through life. So you should always be on the lookout if your opinion is wrong. You should not. We go into discussions in order to convince the other person most of the time. That's not what we should do. It doesn't make sense. We should actually go in a discussion and trying to be convinced.
I guess it depends, right?
No, but
yeah,
I mean on a rational,
Yeah.
because I mean you should always assume my opinion could be wrong, and now I have to really search all my discussion partners. I have to look for maybe they tell me they can prove to me that my opinion is wrong, and that would be a very good thing, because afterwards I have an opinion that is, I mean, truth is a big word, but that is more factual, and we should actually you should wake up in the morning and hope today will be the day that I'm going to change my mind about something. That should fill you with joy, because it should be a tremendous advantage going through life with the right opinions, the factual, more based opinions than you have maybe now, but you don't do it. And that was kind of the second big question, the riddle we wanted to solve, or I wanted to solve in the story. Why does this happen?
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because of course we need to bound that curiosity with something. So if you have everyday interactions, you don't need to question those. But when it comes to conceptual discussions, then if we engage with somebody that we feel is also engaging in good faith, it's great to engage in a way where we're hoping to be convinced. And that's kind of the sort of the ideal that every scientist tries to aspire to, right?
Yes.
Is I'm not going to question whether somebody's like, oh, riding a bicycle causes cancer. It's not something I'm going to be open-minded to, but when I walk into my office, I want to be open-minded, as open-minded as possible. But there's that level of sort of epistemic assessment that I'm making of, okay, these individuals have some kind of knowledge base in a domain that I appreciate, and so I want to be open-minded here, but then I can be closed-minded everywhere else. And
exactly.
I guess this is where it becomes difficult, right?
Yes, maybe I should make a caveat here. So the opinions I'm talking about. So if your example, if you come to the office and you are discussing with your colleagues how to do a study, how to do an experiment, you're very open-minded there. That's not the opinions I mean here. I mean opinions that are political, that are closely kind of related to your worldview, that are kind of have maybe a kind of a moral side to it. That's the opinions I am talking about. So we should maybe separate that, because needless to say, yes, there are. I hope so that you and with your colleagues you can discuss, and the goal of the discussion is to find the best solution. But if you look at political discussions, if you look at Twitter, social media in general, you see a lot of other discussions where you see obviously people don't really have no interest at all in being convinced from another opinion.
Yeah, there's this core idea in sort of a philosophy of democratic ideals, and it centers around discourse, and discourse being sort of one of the tenets of democracy. Not voting itself. Voting is just an operational thing, but the fact that discussion, access to discourse, and then access to be able to engage is one of the crucial things that helps us protect the democratic system. The voting is just ancillary, right? And so were there other things that you found doing this research? Because it started out as a single issue, but then you ended up writing a book about it.
Maybe just talking about scientists, it is when I give talks and also in front of scientists, sometimes it happens that just recently somebody told me, yes, but that's true for all other people, but we are scientists, so we are those kind of objective, cold thinkers. And so, but I was just asking back, I know of a lot of really people having issues with each other, scientists from exactly the same field, so it can't be the information. They both have exact the same information, but they have big and very personal fights. So, where does that come from? If, you're always objective, you're just looking for the factual, most accurate position. So it can't be this with scientists too. I was wondering about this fact that people did not come up with the possibility that the other person could be right. And I realized that the interesting question to ask is probably one that has to do with a general misunderstanding about the function of the brain. So if you ask people, what is a brain for? What is your brain for? A human brain? So they say something like thinking or logic, something along those lines. But actually that's not true. In evolutionary terms, there is only one task a brain has to do. It has to keep the body alive on which it sits. Because if the body is dead, there is all thinking doesn't help anything. So now it turns out that staying alive, the right opinions, yes, maybe they help you sometimes. Facts may help you sometimes. But there is one other really important thing that helps you staying alive, that helped you during our evolutionary development, and that is being part of a group. Nothing was more important than being part of a group. And what that means for opinions is, or maybe let's just give some examples where we can see how people conform to a group in terms of opinions. There was one study done in the 90s when the Palestinians and the Israeli had their peace talks. And this researcher, she had access to the different peace propositions that were written down by either Palestinians or Israeli. And she had the idea to give those proposals to students, either Israeli or Palestinian students, and so they should just assess what they think of this proposal. What the students didn't know that for some groups, she switched the author of those proposals. So the proposal of the Israeli was assigned to the Palestinians and vice versa. And sure enough, the students thought the proposals of their enemy suddenly was much better than their own. So what does that mean? It was not the content of the peace proposal that was important. The only thing that was important is who wrote it, which group it came from. There are other experiments, a lot of experiments that show how much we conform, even to a group of strangers. If a lot of people you never met utter an opinion before you or before it's your turn, that was done in an experiment, people switch their opinions. They conform to those opinions. And there was also a study done in the US where they were talking about climate change, and so they found out that knowledge. They did a test with Democrats and Republicans, and how much they knew about climate change. I mean, real facts. And they found out the more people knew, the more polarized the opinions were. So it seems that this additional knowledge and additional intelligence, education, it's not used to assess your opinion. It's just to find more arguments for the opinion you already had before.
Yeah, there's a big aspect of the work that we do ends up just being finding justifications rather than looking for counter arguments.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there's an interesting thing there, especially when you look at with the Oslo Accords, like with these two groups of students, because you have two distinct things there that are at play that sometimes work in tandem. One is that you default to the group bias, which maybe was the framing of the paper as well, and then the other is that we arbitrate a lot of things. So we outsource a lot of the beliefs that we have to people that we think are experts. Mm-hmm. And so that also can work in tandem with, okay, it's an expert and they're in my group, and so I might as well just outsource to them. And I think that's a really interesting finding with groups of students, because it's not just a group valence, but it's also saying this person is in my group and the expert here with negotiation.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And that's sort of similar to some of the work that I was doing with Professor Ayşecan Bodroğlu in Turkey. She was at Boğaziçi, now a coach. But it's basically looks at if people share the beliefs we share, regardless of whether or not they're experts in a domain, we take them as valid sources of information for other things.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so that ends up being quite an interesting thing to find. If somebody has the same beliefs as I do about climate change and vaccination, and they have some opinion about how AI should be regulated, I'll default to them even if they're not AI experts.
I mean, look at like typical opinions in kind of in the political sphere. If I tell you somebody is critical of nuclear power, and I ask you what kind of refugee policy would they favor, immediately you could say they would favor an open refugee policy. Yeah. I mean, that just goes together. Although if you look at those two things, they have nothing to do with each other. That's exactly what you say, and that's what that was then the first kind of revelation, which is not that new, but opinions are not or as much a social phenomenon as a kind of a rational phenomenon. So opinions we do have. I wrote we don't hold opinions. We are our opinions. So opinions, they're kind of providing us with identity, and that is so very important. And most people, a lot of times we don't realize it ourselves, how much we are influenced by social factors in terms of our opinions.
Yeah, I'm fully with you. There's a bit of confirmation bias, but the crux of the philosophical work that I do is defining our identities as the hierarchy of beliefs that we maintain, which is basically this. You can sort of define opinions and beliefs in the same way, but it's basically the dispositions we have towards information are basically what we do. That's what we represent in our social group. And just to kind of add more to what you're saying, that one of the interesting sort of phenomena in the United States was that in the 60s and 70s, climate change and environmental protection was actually a Republican issue, because they were wealthy individuals who wanted to protect their own parks and gardens that they lived around. And the Democrats were saying this is just a wealthy man's issue, because everybody should have more access to streets and public parking and things like that. And it ended up switching. So things like that happen all the time, where within 2 decades you could be arguing for the opposite opinion for a different set of valid reasons.
Exactly. Yes. And it's also fascinating if you look at social media, Twitter and so on, or X as it's called now. It's fascinating that you can see that people are not, they don't have opinions because they they thought long and hard about something, and then they finally decide, yes, I'm going to write this and that. No, actually, what they do, what we all do from time to time, more or less, is we kind of wave the flag and we say, hey, I'm part of your group. I agree with you, independent of how much I know about the issue. And more also, no, I don't agree with this guy. I'm not part of this group. It's very important to keep track of which group you want to belong to and which not, and always to send those signals.
Yeah.
Those signals. Who am I? How do I want to be seen by the others? Which group I belong to?
Absolutely. Signaling, I think, is such an important part of when we look at social cognition to try to understand behavior. Because a lot of times what people are doing is demonstrating more than actually operating in a way which is efficient to achieve the goal. Right. It's just that you have to account that signaling is one of the important goals as well.
Exactly. In this respect, it's not irrational to do it. Mm-hmm. It may be rational. It's kind of maybe a little bit of a tragedy of the commons here. You do what is rational for you at the moment with this group, but it doesn't really provide society with new solutions to solve problems. So I think there is some kind of tragedy of the commons. But the interesting thing even here is, now if this is true, if opinions are much more a social issue than a question of rationality, why is the illusion so strong that it's the other way around? I mean, this illusion is so strong that we still go into even if we know that, we go into this discussion to convince the other party. We still don't wake up in the morning hoping our opinions will be changed. And that was the next question I had to solve. Why is this illusion so strong? And I came up with another question that is maybe strange at first. That is, do animals have opinions? Now, does the mouse have an opinion on the cat? Probably not. I don't know, but I would argue that the mouse just runs away. The mouse is equipped with some intuitions, reflexes that make the mouse run away when there is a cat. And so all those intuitions, instincts and reflexes that are not that are kind of sit in our brain, we also have them. We still have them through our evolutionary history. But in addition, and I think that's where the problem with the opinion starts, in addition to that, we did get the frontal cortex that where the planning happens, where consciousness sits, where rational thought sits. And now we were in a completely new situation because we could explain what we were doing. Now the mouse does not explain what it is doing, it just runs. Now we can explain what we are doing, and also it's also expected that we kind of justify what we do. But the situation of the frontal cortex was somewhat bizarre because it had to explain things it didn't know why they happened, because some of them were still kind of geared through those old archaic parts of the brain, like those reflexes, instincts, as I said. So it's like I read this somewhere. I think it was Jonathan Haidt's book. It's like the brain is like an elephant and a rider. He uses this metaphor Where you have the elephant is those old archaic stuff of the brain we don't have conscious access to, and the rider is the frontal cortex. The rider is rationality, and it sits on the elephant. The elephant is so strong it does whatever it wants, and the rider has to explain why the elephant does that or that, but the rider doesn't actually know. The rider doesn't actually know. So in terms of opinions, what that means is a lot of times we have opinions long before we have the facts, and afterwards we search for the opinions. So we don't have first the facts and then the opinions, but kind of we run after our opinions with a kind of a patchwork of justifications. But the brain makes it seem like it was the other way around, that the facts were first there, and the opinions came afterwards based on those facts. Now, those facts you find afterwards, they may be perfectly fine. I'm not saying they're wrong. Some of them are, but you can find really extremely arguments, good arguments. But the point is that you found them after you already had the opinion, and that makes the kind of the central sentence of my book is probably: we believe that we can convince others with facts because we are under the illusion that we were convinced by facts too. That's the kind of a self-illusion we have. We think our opinions feel extremely authentic from the inside. They feel like they are grounded in those facts, and we had the facts first. And that's why it's so difficult for us to understand that other people, they don't react to our facts with changing their mind. Well, why doesn't this guy change his mind? I mean, I gave him the facts. I was convinced by those facts. So is it so difficult to be convinced by this fact? No, you were not convinced by those facts. You actually had your opinion, and your brain makes you believe that you were convinced by these facts.
Yeah, I would say that I largely agree with that. I think it's useful, again, to kind of go back to something like a mouse. Just in general, life has dispositions towards information and stimuli. So a cat can be stimuli, it can be information, and a mouse has a disposition towards the stimuli of the cat. Mm-hmm. And so we can call that opinion or a belief, but I do agree that calling it an opinion is very hazy. But there is a certain goal there that the mouse is trying to maintain. Not that it's reflecting on that, not that it has the ability to create the concept of a goal and visualize it, but it is the manifestation of that set of goals, mm-hmm. right? And that, the people miss the fact that the brain is structured for self-maintenance. It is organization and orchestration, and it requires a certain of integration of information, and then you get basically all the activity that you get, especially if we look at, say, the mammalian brain. And the interesting thing about humans is, I think that I see it very much as you do, and I think Kate's example is a good one, metaphor is a good one, is that I see the frontal lobe as just a second order integration of information. It doesn't have, I don't believe in an objective sense of rationality. I think that rationality is inherently subjective, and that the frontal lobe gives us that ability mm-hmm. to generate these second order integrations, which we can call rationality, but it's always sort of geared towards the set of goals that we maintain anyway in our environment.
I mean, that's you're exactly right. One part of that is often missing in this discussion is, what is your underlying goal? Because people assume they have the same goals, so they don't understand why there are different opinions. But sometimes you realize, okay, we don't want the same thing, and that's why we have a different opinion. We don't imagine an ideal world in the same way. That's why we have different opinions. And I think, although the discussion is much more difficult there, because maybe it's also about values, which is something much deeper than an opinion. But at least you know now why you have different opinions on certain things, and you're not. It doesn't stay superfluous. But you know, okay, this person. I mean, like, let's take with COVID. I think there is two poles there. It's kind of security. You want to be safe, and there is freedom. And it's maybe kind of a zero-sum game here. So if you want more freedom, you do have less. You're less safe. You have less security, and vice versa. And I only realized that after COVID happened, that people have a vastly different sense of what they want in terms of freedom, and also what they are willing to sacrifice for it. And I think that was completely underestimated, that some people are really willing to sacrifice quite a lot for freedom, for a lot of freedom. I mean, you have to, if you're living in a kind of community, there is never the total freedom, but I think that's as you said, that's a very important question. What is actually the goal? What is my underlying goal? And that is an extremely important part of the discussion.
Yeah, maybe we can shift a bit more towards experiments as well. And I'll open up with one. Please.
Can I just
absolutely.
Just there is one final step I would
absolutely.
like to mention. Now, if you talk about opinions, so they're not born from facts. Disagreements can't often solved with facts, and you will always believe that you are more right than everybody else. I mean, that's kind of depressing. And I was thinking, is there a way where you can show to people that actually their opinions, the opinions they have, are a lot more flimsy than they think? And I think there is a way. It's kind of proper for opinions. So the question is, imagine or think of an opinion that's dear to your heart. And I give you 5 seconds to come up with. That's what I do during talks. I give the people 5 seconds to come up with an answer to the following question: what would make you change your mind? And if you ask this, people, most of them don't have an answer. And I think if you are saying this is an issue you thought through, this should have been the first question you asked. Not, why do I believe this? What is supporting evidence? But you should have thought of, when would I change your mind? What would have to happen? And it has to be something realistic. So I think that is a very good test for in a discussion with another person, but also for your own opinion. So that's why I wanted to.
It's a really good point.
Close this up.
Yeah, that's a game that we play a lot of times if we're planning an experiment, which I think is a very good game to play in the political realm as well, which we don't. I definitely don't do enough. But we do if we're trying to plan. Okay, why do you think that we should build the experiment this way? How could one of us change the other's mind? But in the political realm, I think that's incredibly important. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Popper. One of the things that I always say is we need more scientists reading philosophy of science, because this is for me, it's a very sort of crucial bit of how I do science is lean on the philosophy of science. And there's, are you familiar with Peter Godfrey Smith? He wrote Theory and Reality. No. Great sort of primer on the philosophy of science that I think is a great companion to the type of work that you do, because he addresses just the development of the philosophy of science, what information is, what a theory is, and how we might approach reality and our beliefs about reality, sort of through the scientific method. Mm-hmm. But the scientific method is so much reliant on the things that we're talking about at this table right now, which is the ability to have and develop justifications for things we believe, but also being very open to counter justifications of other beliefs. And so it's important, say, to defend what you believe in order to have some semblance of a reason why you hold it, but also to take in the counter arguments and potentially change your mind as well.
Right.
And maybe with one experiment that I wanted to bring up, which maybe we can use as a transition, is with just this idea that you very much post hoc develop rationale for your behavior. There's a whole set of experiments with individuals who had their corpus callosum split, which is the set of nerves that connect the two lobes of your brain. And if you sever the corpus callosum, the two lobes can't really communicate with each other. And so there's a really interesting set of experiments where you can close one eye and show instructions, and people can see the instruction, but with the lobe that is connected to that eye, which is the same lobe in this case, and then they will stand up if the piece of paper says stand up. But the ability to produce speech is in the opposite lobe. And so the experiment will ask, why did you stand up? And they'll say, oh, I feel like I needed to stretch. But they were actually standing up because they followed instructions, but there's no way for the two lobes to communicate.
Right,
and so that's really a phenomenal sort of experiment where we see it is so much post hoc explanation going on.
I mean, I'm talking about that.
Yeah.
There is another really interesting, fascinating experiment by two Swedish researchers, which actually is the same, but this is just common people, so they have no kind of brain lesion. So what they did was they showed the participants were sitting on a table like the two of us right now, and the experimenter showed the participant two pictures, two portraits of, in most cases they were women, two kind of faces, and they had to point to the one they liked more. And so when they pointed to this one, say to the right one, they put it on the table and they shifted it to the other person. What the person did not know, they switched through. They had actually magicians working with them. They switched the portraits. So the person actually did not get what he or she had chosen, but the other one. And then they asked, why did you choose especially this face? What do you like about this face? Nobody realized that. It's not nobody. I mean, some people found out, I think it was in the 70-80% that didn't realize anything. Most of the people actually gave reasons for a choice they didn't make, just on the spot.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, there is in one case, one of the women on this picture had earrings, and the other had no earrings. And this guy was saying, and he got the one with the earrings, and yes, I like this face so much because I like earrings. But the one he chose did not have earrings.
Yes.
So it's amazing. It's a very good demonstration of how we make up things in hindsight, but believe we had held this opinion all along.
And you had actually run a workshop at the Complexity Science Hub, kind of working through bizarre experiments and getting people to try to think of ways to run them. Can you give us a couple that you think are?
Yeah. Okay. Let's. So there was one about embarrassment research. So that's a line in psychology. You try to find out when are people embarrassed, what is the reaction, and so on. And so there are different. So what you need to do, you need to put people in a lab in an embarrassing situation. And I think it's just funny, what researchers came up with. So the standard technique in the 70s was singing. And in one experiment especially, they had this fake computer, and they were saying the participants, this computer can judge how good your singing is. And then they were singing, and the computer gave them kind of a miserable grade. And then they had to sing in front of people. And now they knew that this was really embarrassing when one of the participants fled. Now he asked if he could go to the restroom, and he climbed out of the window of the restroom in the first floor of the building. That's not in the paper. I talked to the researcher, and he told me. So and there are other things you can do, like saying somebody that he smells badly, for example. That's very
salient,
embarrassing. And when I when we had this workshop, so I gave them those research questions, and one group came up with a really ingenious methods. They said, yes, you would ask the participant to do a presentation, a short presentation on his or her laptop, and you would kind of manipulate the laptop that there would be a pop-up window, kind of your porn subscriptions just did run out. So I thought this was really funny. I'm not sure what an ethical committee would think of that, but just as a kind of free-floating thought, I thought this was quite creative.
Yeah, and you ended up compiling a book of experiments like this, and you found a lot of the researchers who actually did the work, which is pretty amazing.
Yes, I do this now for 25 years already.
Oh, wow.
The column, so it's the column in the magazine. It's called The Experiment. So I have quite a collection. And yes, I mean, that's the interesting thing. If people are still alive, I always try to contact them. And the first question I ask is, I tell them, I read the paper. Tell me what's not in the paper.
Nice.
So, and it's fascinating a lot of times, I mean, as we all know, in a scientific paper, it looks like everything went smoothly and we had this idea and this was the procedure and so on. And I mean, there's always the question connected, what went wrong? And a lot of times, amazingly, a lot of things went wrong. For example, I mean, if I may give in a funny story, I mean, not so funny for the participant. Was always the question about hypnosis. Would you can you be convinced to get the crime under hypnosis, or to harm yourself, or to do any antisocial act? And this was a real serious question in the 19th century in France, because there's mesmerism came up, and as hypnosis was called at the time, and a lot of people at court just told the judge, I was hypnotized and I was ordered to do this, so it's not my fault. You cannot punish me. And so the courts basically went to the scientists and said, we need answers here. You have to find out if what is possible under hypnosis. So that's whole of this line of research started with a lot of really funny research. But the particular instance I wanna talk about is you always have this problem that if you do this research in a lab, you have to tell somebody to do something that seems clearly dangerous to them, but isn't dangerous. So you have to. There is kind of this difficult line to walk. Now there were a lot of different ways of doing it. Like, for example, putting your hand in a goblet with snakes in there, but the snakes were kind of separated by an invisible window. And one method that was quite popular, actually, was you throw acid in the face. You were ordered to throw acid in the face of the experimenter.
Oh my God.
So, and how they did it was, they had this glass of acid, and to prove to the participant that this is really acid, they put a penny in it, so the penny dissolved, and then they switched the acid with water. In a moment. The participant didn't look, so they just needed a glass of water. It looked exactly the same. So in one case, they kind of messed up, and they didn't switch the acid with water. And I found out about that. It was only a footnote in this paper, and the guy was called Hardcore Stebbins, and it's such an unusual name that there was just one Hardcore Stebbins in the US. And I found him in the phone book. I called him up. He died several years ago. That was 15 years ago. He was already 88 when I called him.
Not from a result of the burns.
And I asked him, and unfortunately, he told me, yes, I'm the guy who got the acid in the face. But fortunately, I only have. He had a small scar, like in the hair, so it wasn't. It wasn't. That danger. It was just
This is a kind of stupid idea you completely shut down these days. But I guess, when was that, in the 70s?
No, that was much earlier.
Okay,
that
thank
was,
goodness.
I think just after the war, in the 40s.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, right, because he was probably a graduate assistant.
Yeah.
There's no way the professor was going to be like, you can pretend to throw the acid in my face. It's definitely
I think you use
research
grad
assistant.
students for that.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Yeah, and maybe just...
Please.
When I started writing about these experiments, to be honest, I did it because it was just fun. It was just, I didn't think a lot about is there a deeper meaning to it? But more and more I realized that the interesting thing about writing about those old kind of unimportant experiments also is the method. I mean, science is not knowledge. Science is how you get to the knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really fascinating, especially, with the means at the time, like in the 40s or in the 70s, whenever, or in the 19th century, there were always kind of ingenious ideas of how to kind of isolate a factor in an experiment, or kind of really elegant ways to do things. And so that's what I think is fascinating in those, as I said, not in general terms. It's not cancer research. It's not the Big Bang. It's in a sense, it's a lot of times it's not that important. But there are really lessons to be drawn from those kind of ingenious methods they used to figure things out.
Yeah, that is so much of the day-to-day work in science is just a clever way to isolate the variables, right? And make sure, and that's so much of the things that get under noticed, because what we do is celebrate the results and the findings. Right. But the methods, that's the crux of science, right? Is just from the air pump, to today.
Exactly.
It's just methods.
Yeah.
That's really fun. So if I could pick your brain about two more things that you mentioned at the beginning. One about sentencing. So can you kind of walk us through what you found with that?
So it started, actually, I became fascinated by the fact that if you sentence somebody today, you basically have two ways of sentencing. They pay some money, at least in Western societies, you pay some money, or you go to jail. That's the two things. And the court sets an amount of money or a length of of a jail sentence. Now, on the other hand, on the other side, you have a variety of amazingly different crimes. I mean, you have a murder, and then you have espionage, you have burning a flag, it's uncomparable. It's illegal by law, but it's kind of uncomparable. But now, if you have to kind of map those crimes to the sentence, they become comparable. Now you have to decide how much money do you have to steal, and it will be the same. It will be the same sentence as if you hit somebody. So you have to put things in order, and that's how it started. That's how I became fascinated with the subject. What I realized when I did the research is that it's actually well known in court systems that people do get for exact the same crime vastly different sentences, and I mean really, really very different sentences. There are some experiments, very few. I could find very few where you basically give kind of case vignettes where you write down a kind of a crime, what somebody did, what his history was, and you give it to like 10 judges, and they will tell you what the sentence would be. And I found in Switzerland, there's one such study was done I could a little bit rely on. And the difference was a factor in the 80s. So there was 1 month and 80 months for exactly the same case. On average, that's the kind of the max. On average, the differences were like at least tenfold, 6, 7, 8 to tenfold. And most people know that this is an unsolved problem, and it seems a little bit like, those guys are guilty anyways. So it's only the question what sentence they will get. They have no lobby at all. I mean, which politician would say, listen, guys, we have to be fair, even to criminals. We have to be fair. And a lot of the judgments are not even published. So even the judges themselves, they don't know, how do I compare to others? I think it's kind of scandalous, because it could be, there would be some possibilities to at least, without a big bureaucracy, at least to give the judges a sense of, where do I stand with my ruling. And that was quite a fascinating insight here.
Yeah, especially because the results can be devastating.
Especially, I mean, it's so existential. Yeah. And even, to us, I don't know about you, I was never in prison. So you could maybe argue, if they have to stay, like if they have 4 years or 4.5 years, I mean, the difference is not, but 6 more months in prison.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's huge.
And it's much more, it's in the order of, several magnitudes.
Yeah. You're talking about hundreds of percent more, and just 6 months out of 4, you're talking about 18% longer. And it's really wild. Yeah, that's something actually that I care a lot about, and I'm not a big fan of prisons and the justice system as it certainly stands. And of course, there's so much in the United States, especially about race, where we have so many reliable figures that show that if you're a person of color, you're going to get a larger jail sentence by virtue of just that. And then also strange things of, whether the judge had eaten yet or not, if their blood sugar was low.
There were those studies from Israel.
There's the previous episode we had on Katarina Kovacevic, who's in this department, and she's a cognitive scientist doing really good work on how we ascribe guilt. And I'd love to put you in touch if you're still interested in this, because she just got a grant to go to Warsaw to do work with judges, lawyers, scientists, and then just average people of when they ascribe guilt and what sentences should look like. She's doing really cool work.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'd love to put you in touch. She's really great.
Yeah.
And I guess the last thing I'd love to go over is land ownership. How did you get into the concept of land ownership?
I have a little bit a knack for those really kind of children's questions, maybe.
I love this. Yeah.
And I mean the one question is how can you own land at all, because it was always there.
Yeah.
So and that was one other question I was kind of always a little bit, reading about it and thinking about it. And going back in time, you see that this kind of patch of land in the middle of Zurich, where I work, was owned by nobody, and now somebody owns it. And the question was, what happened in between? What happened? So I tried to find kind of exceptional properties also, like land that is owned by nobody, that's not even the state, and that almost every country knows such pieces of land. And I kind of went through the whole history of land ownership with those kind of four different properties I found in Switzerland. And it's especially interesting because you cannot, so land actually is not, if you look at a capitalistic system, there are, this is really now, I'm talking now out of my league here. I have to say, because I'm not an economist, but my understanding is at the core of capitalism are two things, namely, if somebody produces something that is, you think is too expensive, you can produce it yourself and do it cheaper.
Yeah.
Okay. And if somebody produces something that is too expensive, you don't have to buy it. You buy something else. Now, interestingly, for land, those two things are not true. Mm-hmm. For one, you cannot produce new land. It's just we have this finite number of pieces of properties. That's it. Also, in one spot, there is only one piece of land. So it's kind of a monopolistic thing there. Each piece is it's only once, so we cannot produce. So this is this idea of we produce more. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And the second thing is you have to consume land. You have to sit and stand somewhere. You have to sleep somewhere. You have to walk somewhere. You need to. You cannot say, I don't use land. And that was the underlying thought which I had when I went through the history. I mean, it's interestingly still. I think the English royals are on paper they are the largest landowner in the world. On paper, as far as I read it, or the people I read kind of say, they basically still own Canada.
Technically, yeah.
Technically.
Yeah.
So, and also in kind of how do you rationalize that you kind of own land? And it's interesting, like in the Middle Ages, it was, you had a king, and he was basically, he did God's work, and everybody said, yes, I mean, the land is actually owned by God, but he's not around, and I am here, and I kind of do the work for him here. So I will do it for him, and then you can give land to your to some people, which will give you favors, do you favors for that. I mean, that's how it started, and then as always in history, it got kind of murky, when democracy came and people owned land or they were working on a piece of land for a very long time, there came those rules that, yes, if you are working there for 30 years, it's yours now, and also things like that, which are not kind of very logic, but you kind of needed a way of dealing with it. You could not kind of build a system from scratch where you say, okay, all the land is state-owned and we just give it out for 100 years, then we get it back. So unfortunately, maybe, I don't know if that would be better. I could imagine, but that's not an option anymore.
Yeah, there are interesting problems of how to solve this. Well, Vienna has an interesting model where they actually buy up a lot of the land so that they can offer it very cheaply to everybody who lives here, which I think is a great model. And because there's this interesting thing of you have land for consumption of agriculture or production, but then you have land for living in, which in a sense you can create more of by creating more floors, right? But other types of land you can't, right? There's sort of limited space. Mm-hmm. And I think of when you said land that's not owned by anybody, there's a famous case of Sea Shepherd, this organization that tried to stop illegal fishing in albeit illegal ways. But the head of that was actually wanted by Japanese courts, and so he couldn't touch land in any country basically. So when the ship had to go to refuel, they had to drop him off on an island that's not declared by anybody, and then go refuel and pick him back up. And they drop him off with 4 or 5 days of supplies. And he just had to live by himself on a deserted island. It's just so wild to me.
Yeah, that's really wild. I mean, also in terms of, as you are talking about those kind of special cases, there's also the question of, say you have a seaside property. That's actually what happened in Florida. And now there's a hurricane and it removes kind of the sand.
Right.
Okay. Then those people just ordered new sand. So there's lorries came in and just put sand there. But the question was, do they still own the land? And this was a real court case. And actually they don't. Because the laws are kind of the hurricane is a kind of a natural event, but the lorries they're not, and that makes the difference. That was what switched it.
Wow,
so, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, because some countries have sort of dealt with it in different ways. Where if you buy land on the sea, you own up to 10 meters out into the water. Mm-hmm. But then in some countries, you can't own beachfront property. You have to be 50 meters in or something. And so other people solved it that way. Yeah. But that is quite an interesting problem. They replace the sand, they don't own it.
No, not anymore. and also, I mean, the other interesting question is that was, when first people could really buy those pieces of land is how deep do you own your land and how high up?
How high up, right.
And that was not solved, I think it was around in end of the 19th century. And then even into the 20th century when commercial airflight came. And so there were actually people sending so they wanted money from the airlines because they saw this plane flying over. So they quickly realized that they had to do something. And about how deep you own, it actually depends on the country. In France, you still own all the everything is your to the middle of the earth.
Wow.
So if they build a tunnel or so they have to pay you, but unfortunately it's not you who sets the price. So they're fixed price. There's a fixed price tag for when they build something, but they have to pay you because it's on the paper.
Wow.
It's your property.
That's really interesting. I know that in a lot of states in the U.S. you can you have a certain amount, obviously, that you have underground. But if you can hit water as long as it's not connected to a larger water table that the government uses. And if you hit a well that touches on the larger water table, the government now owns that.
Okay.
So that you can't poison the water supply or anything like that, which makes sense. It can be quite irresponsible, I guess, to give everybody access to to a water table that's... but I guess, water is another one of those resources where it seems like it's infinite, but very soon we're going to realize it's in short supply, unfortunately. But is there anything else that you'd like to talk about while we're here?
No, I think this was exhaustive. Much more than we talked about, much more than I thought, but that was wonderful.
I really appreciate that you have a curiosity for a lot of things. I very much share that. I focus on one domain because barely even. I focus on a couple, but purely in the sciences and philosophy only because it makes more sense to make a career out of. You've managed to do it with a very wide sense of things, which is really, I respect a lot and I really appreciate. So I'd like to ask you, just in closing, why do you do what you do?
I'm very intrinsically motivated. When I was working as an engineer in a company, I stopped not because I didn't like it, but it was kind of boring doing this for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. So I don't know. I was always extremely interested in really a lot of things. And at home, my wife and my son, they make sometimes fun of me when when we're having dinner, and I tell them, "Do you know this is really interesting?" And then they start rolling their eyes because they knew I found some kind of curiosity again. And now I'm just diving. Then also I can be somewhat kind of missionary. I dive into it and I read books and I try to know as much as possible about it, which maybe can be annoying sometimes. So I have to kind of practice a little bit restraint here sometimes. But I as much as I would like to say I went into journalism or maybe I would like to believe that myself, that that in order that the world will be a better place. No. I'm just extremely interested how the world really works, how a lot of things work. I only read non-fiction books for that reason, not because there are not. I think the fiction is not great, but every time when I have the choice to, and then my next book, what will be next I want to read, I thought, I could now read this and this novel, but there's still something to know about, I don't know, water consumption, or there's still something to know about anything else. So I'd rather go for a non-fiction book. So that's the long answer.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing it all with us over years of work. Is there an upcoming project you have that you're excited about? Or are you going to work? Is there an upcoming project you have that you're excited about?
Yes, actually there is. I will write the book during the next 5 months. I think about Clever Hans, which is the counting horse, the horse that could do math in Berlin, 1904. Cool. A very bizarre subject, kind of. You see, that's exactly what I mean when I say I'm interested in bizarre subjects.
I can relate.
And I always wanted to read a book about Clever Hans, and I realized there is none. Wow. And he became very important now also with artificial intelligence, because basically the short version is, people saw that Hans gave the right answers when they asked Hans question, and he gave answers by tapping his hoof, but they didn't know why. And it's exactly the same thing that's happening with AI right now. Those LLMs, they give the right answers, but we don't know why. We are in the dark. What happens inside this neural network, what really happens. Do they think like humans? Or probably not, we know that. But what exactly is going on? So that's a parallel and to the horse. And actually, there are a lot of papers coming out right now with clever Hans and AI. The clever Hans problem in AI is like hundreds of papers are there, because it's a serious problem. And so Hans, and I will go also a little bit into the history then of artificial intelligence and how clever Hans plays into it.
Yeah, right. Because we have great animal cognition labs in Vienna, and they're working on corvids, and the multi-step problems that crows and ravens can solve is really phenomenal. We have no idea how they do it.
Exactly.
So I love that you're going to be working on that.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Well, Reto, this is a lot of fun. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It was great. I hope I didn't talk too much.